The bullet ripped through the crisp morning air of El Paso, Texas, missing Hannah Vaughan's cheek by a mere inch as she ducked behind a water trough. It wasn't even 8 in the morning, and someone was already trying to kill her. Again. The acrid scent of gunpowder mixed with the earthy smell of horses and dust as she pressed her back against the rough wooden slats, her breath coming in short, frightened gasps. Mrs. Vaughan. The voice of her would-be killer cut through the sudden silence that followed the shot. Your late husband still owes me money, and I aim to collect one way or another. Hannah closed her eyes, cursing Richard's name silently. Even 8 months dead, her husband was still bringing danger to her doorstep. The boarding house she'd established after his death was finally starting to turn a profit, offering her the first taste of independence she'd ever known. Now this. I don't have your money, Mr. Donovan, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Richard gambled away everything before he died. Then maybe you should consider other ways of payment, Donovan replied, his voice taking on a sickening tone that made Hannah's skin crawl. The sound of approaching hoofbeats saved her from having to answer. Multiple horses, moving fast. Donovan cursed, fired one more wild shot that splintered the wood above Hannah's head. Then the thundering of retreating hooves told her he'd fled. Hannah waited, heart pounding, until a deep voice called out, "Madam." "You all right over there?" Cautiously, she peered around the water trough. 3 riders had stopped in the street, but only one had dismounted, a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his Stetson. He approached slowly, hands visible, showing he meant no harm. "I'm fine," Hannah called, though her trembling legs betrayed her as she stood. "Just another man trying to collect on my husband's debts." The stranger stopped a respectful distance away. When he tipped his hat back, Hannah saw a pair of startlingly blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. He wasn't classically handsome, but there was something compelling about his features, strength and kindness commingled. "Owen Garrett," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Just rode into town. That's not exactly the welcome I was expecting to witness." "Welcome to El Paso," Hannah replied dryly, brushing dust from her skirts. "Where men shoot at widows before breakfast." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That man comes back, you let Sheriff Callahan know, or me, I'll be around." Hannah stiffened. She'd had her fill of men offering protection that came with hidden costs. "I can handle my own problems, Mr. Garrett, but thank you for scaring him off." Owen Garrett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "As you wish, madam." He turned to go, then paused. "Would you happen to know where a man might find decent lodgings in this town?" Hannah hesitated, her business sense warring with her caution around strangers, especially male ones. "I run the Sunflower boarding house, 3 blocks south. Clean rooms, fair prices. No drinking, no fighting, no women brought upstairs." "Sounds perfect," Owen replied. "I'll be along once I stable my horse." As Hannah watched him walk away, she told herself the flutter in her stomach was merely the aftermath of fear, nothing more. She'd sworn off men after Richard's death had revealed the extent of his betrayals. No matter how respectful this stranger seemed, Hannah knew better than to trust the gentle eyes and polite words of a man. They always wanted something in the end. Hannah strode briskly back to the boarding house, determined to put the morning's incident and the stranger's blue eyes out of her mind. She had a business to run. The Sunflower boarding house had been a dilapidated eyesore when Hannah first acquired it, the only asset left after Richard's death that hadn't been claimed by creditors. Through 8 months of relentless work, she'd transformed it into a respectable establishment, one of the few in El Paso where travelers could expect clean sheets and hot meals, without the accompaniment of gunfights or brothel services. As she entered through the back door, Luisa Mendoza looked up from where she was kneading dough at the kitchen table. "Que Paso?" the older woman asked, her experienced eyes immediately noting Hannah's disheveled appearance. "I heard gunshots." "Donovan again," Hannah said, reaching for the coffee pot. Her hand still trembled slightly as she poured herself a cup. "He seems to think I'm hiding Richard's money." Luisa crossed herself. "That hombre es un diablo. Did he hurt you?" "No, some newcomers rode up and scared him off." Hannah took a steadying sip of coffee. "One of them might be coming to rent a room." Luisa's eyebrows rose knowingly. "A handsome newcomer, perhaps?" "I didn't notice," Hannah lied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Of course not," Luisa replied with a smile that said she knew better. "Just like you didn't notice when Dr. Wilson asked if you would accompany him to the town social last month." Hannah set her coffee cup down with more force than necessary. "I've had my fill of men, Luisa. Richard cured me of any romantic notions I might have had." "Not all men are like your husband, Nina." "No," Hannah agreed grimly. "Some are worse." She'd grown up watching her mother suffer under her father's heavy hand, then escaped into marriage with Richard, only to discover he was a gambler, a drinker, and eventually, a man who thought nothing of using his fists when crossed. By the time he'd gotten himself killed in a dispute over cards, Hannah's body had healed from his abuses, but her heart remained scarred and wary. The front bell jangled, signaling a guest's arrival. Hannah smoothed her hair, adjusted her apron, and headed to the front desk, her professional smile firmly in place. Owen Garrett stood in the entrance hall, hat in hand, saddlebags slung over one broad shoulder. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the golden stubble on his jaw and the hint of premature silver at his temples. Hannah estimated him to be in his early 30s, perhaps 5 or 6 years older than her 26 years. "Good morning, Mrs." He paused, realizing he hadn't caught her full name earlier. "Vaughan," she supplied. "Hannah Vaughan, Mrs. Vaughan," he acknowledged with a nod. "I'd like to rent a room if you still have one available." Hannah moved behind the desk, opening her ledger. "How long will you be staying, Mr. Garrett?" "Can't rightly say," he replied. "I've come to El Paso on business that might take a week or two." Hannah eyed him carefully. In her experience, men who were vague about their business were usually involved in something illicit. "What kind of business, if I may ask?" "I run a respectable establishment." A smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Nothing that would bring trouble to your door, madam. I'm a horse trader primarily. Also do some work for the army occasionally, breaking and training mounts." That explained the capable, solid look of him. Hannah relaxed slightly. "I have a room available on the second floor, east side. $2 a week, breakfast included. Supper is an additional 50 cents per day." "Sounds fair," Owen said, reaching into his vest pocket. He counted out $4. 2 weeks in advance. If I leave earlier, consider the balance a token of appreciation for taking me in on short notice." Hannah wrote his name in her ledger, noting the neat, precise handwriting seemed at odds with her initial impression of a rugged outdoorsman. "Room 4, top of the stairs and to your right. Breakfast is served from 6 to 8, supper at 6 in the evening. No liquor on the premises and quiet hours begin at 9. Owen accepted the key she offered. "Thank you, Mrs. Vaughan." He hesitated, then added, "About that trouble this morning is not your concern, Mr. Garrett," Hannah interrupted firmly. "I've managed 8 months on my own in El Paso. I'll continue to do so." Something flickered across his face, respect, perhaps, or admiration before he nodded. "Of course. But should you need an extra pair of hands for anything, I'm at your service." As he climbed the stairs, Hannah found herself watching the way he moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. Not the swagger that so many men affected in these parts, trying to prove something with every step. An interesting man, no. Lewis's voice came from behind her, making Hannah start. A paying guest, Hannah corrected. Nothing more. But as she returned to her daily tasks, Hannah couldn't quite shake the unsettling awareness that had stirred within her, something she'd thought long dead after Richard's cruelty. It wasn't attraction, she told herself firmly, merely curiosity about a stranger who had shown unexpected courtesy. Curiosity was natural and harmless, as long as she remembered that men like Owen Garrett, no matter how polite or helpful they seemed, inevitably revealed their true nature sooner or later. Over the next few days, Owen Garrett proved to be the ideal boarder. He rose early, ate breakfast quickly and quietly, and spent most of his days absent from the boarding house. When he returned in the evenings, he was unfailingly polite to Hannah, Louisa, and the other three boarders: a retired schoolteacher, a young bank clerk, and a traveling salesman. Despite her determination to keep her distance, Hannah found herself noticing small things about him. The way he always thanked Louisa in passable Spanish for her cooking, how he'd taken to fixing the squeaky porch step without being asked. The fact that, unlike most men she knew, he actually listened when others spoke, his blue eyes attentive and thoughtful. On the fourth morning of his stay, Hannah was sweeping the front porch when she noticed Owen in deep conversation with Sheriff Callahan across the street. The lawman appeared to be showing him papers of some kind, and their discussion seemed serious. When Owen glanced up and caught her watching, Hannah quickly resumed her sweeping, a flush warming her cheeks at being caught staring. Later that afternoon, while Hannah was doing the accounts at her desk, the front bell jangled. She looked up to find Owen entering, his expression grim. "Mrs. Vaughan," he said, approaching the desk. "I thought you should know that man Donovan has been asking around town about you. About your routines when you're alone at the boarding house." Hannah's stomach clenched. "How do you know this?" "Sheriff Callahan mentioned it," Owen replied. "I've been helping him with some matters and your name came up." "What matters?" Hannah asked sharply. "And why would my name come up?" Owen hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't want to alarm you, but I suppose you deserve to know. I'm not just a horse trader. I also work as a deputy U.S. Marshal when needed. Marshal Davis asked me to come to El Paso to assist Sheriff Callahan with some investigations." Hannah stared at him, feeling betrayed though she couldn't articulate why. "You're a lawman, and you didn't think to mention this when you took a room in my house." "It's not something I advertise," Owen said quietly. "Especially when I'm looking into matters that might involve local men of influence." "And does your investigation involve me in some way?" Hannah demanded, rising from her chair. "No, madam, but this Donovan character keeps your name on his lips, and that concerns me." Hannah's fingers tightened around her pencil. "I don't need your concern, Marshal Garrett. I've dealt with men like Donovan before." "Hannah," Owen said, using her given name for the first time, his voice gentle but serious. "This man isn't just after money, he's dangerous. Sheriff Callahan has reports linking him to 2 murders in Santa Fe last year, women who couldn't pay their husbands' debts." Ice washed through Hannah's veins, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for the information, Marshal. I'll be more careful." "I'd like to offer protection." "No," Hannah cut him off firmly. "I don't want special attention because of this. Just do your job, Marshal Garrett, and I'll manage my own affairs." Owen studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. "As you wish. But I hope you'll consider carrying this." He reached into his coat and produced a small derringer. "It's easy to conceal, simple to use." Hannah stared at the gun, memories flooding back of Richard threatening her with his revolver, holding it to her temple when she discovered money missing from their savings. Her throat tightened. "I don't use firearms," she said, her voice strained. Something in her tone or expression must have revealed more than she intended, because Owen's eyes softened with understanding. Wordlessly, he tucked the derringer away. "Then at least promise you won't go anywhere alone for a while," he said. "Have Louisa or someone with you, please." The genuine concern in his eyes disarmed Hannah more effectively than any argument could have. "I promise," she agreed reluctantly. "But in exchange, I expect the whole truth from you from now on, Marshal Garrett." "Owen," he corrected, "and you have my word." As he turned to leave, Hannah called after him, "Why did you really choose my boarding house? Was it to keep an eye on me?" Owen paused at the stairs. "No. I chose it because when I asked around town for a decent place to stay, 3 different people mentioned the Sunflower as being as honest as its owner." A smile touched his lips. "Seems your reputation precedes you, Mrs. Vaughan." With that, he climbed the stairs, leaving Hannah with a confusing mixture of wariness, relief, and most disturbing of all a flicker of warmth at his words. True to his word, over the following days, Owen was more forthcoming about his work. Hannah learned he'd been a marshal for 5 years, though he still maintained his horse trading business between assignments. He'd come to El Paso investigating a suspected cattle rustling operation that might have connections to larger criminal enterprises across the territory. "The rustling itself isn't unusual out here," Owen explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. The other boarders had retired early, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. "But the organization behind it is. These aren't just opportunists stealing a few head here and there. They're systematically targeting specific ranches, using the railroad to move stolen cattle quickly across state lines." Despite her determination to maintain her distance, Hannah found herself intrigued by his work and drawn into conversation more easily than she'd expected. Owen had a way of speaking that invited questions without pressure, and listening that made her feel her opinions mattered. "And where does Donovan fit into this?" she asked. Owen's expression darkened. "He's a hired gun for whoever's running things. Not the brains, but dangerous nonetheless." Hannah shivered slightly in the cooling evening air. "Richard owed him money from poker games. He claims it was over $200. "Did your husband gamble often?" Owen asked carefully. Hannah gave a bitter laugh. "Often. It was his true passion in life, that and drinking, and—" She stopped, unwilling to speak of the other ways Richard had betrayed their marriage. "I'm sorry," Owen said simply. "Don't be." "His death was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me," Hannah replied, surprising herself with her candor. "That sounds terrible, doesn't it?" "No," Owen said, his voice gentle but firm. "It sounds honest." Their eyes met in the fading light, and for a moment Hannah felt understood in a way she hadn't experienced since before her marriage. It was both comforting and terrifying. "I should check on things inside," she said abruptly, rising from her chair. Owen stood as well, respecting her need for distance. "Of course. Thank you for the conversation, Hannah." As she went inside, Hannah scolded herself for letting her guard down. Owen Garrett might seem different from other men, but experience had taught her that appearances were deceiving. The kindness in his eyes, the respect in his manner, these could change in an instant. Richard had been charming too once. Nevertheless, over the following days, Hannah found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch. Owen never pressed her for personal information, but somehow, bits of her story emerged anyway: how she'd come to Texas from Missouri as a young bride, full of hopes for a fresh start. How she'd learned bookkeeping to help manage Richard's business ventures, only to discover he was squandering everything on gambling and women. In turn, Owen shared parts of his own past growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, losing his parents to influenza when he was 17, working as a cowhand until an army officer noticed his way with difficult horses and offered him a contract breaking mounts for the cavalry. "How did you become a marshal?" Hannah asked one evening. "By accident, mostly," Owen replied with a small smile. "I helped track down some horse thieves who'd stolen army stock. One of the thieves turned out to be wanted for murder in 3 territories. The marshal who'd been hunting him for months was impressed enough to suggest I consider the badge." "You enjoy the work." Owen considered this. "I believe in justice, in protecting those who can't protect themselves. The badge gives me the authority to do that." He paused. "But I've seen how the law can fail people too, especially women and those without means or influence." Hannah nodded, thinking of how little help the law had been during her marriage. No one had intervened when Richard's drunken rages turned violent. A wife was property in the eyes of many, even here in 1878. "Is that why you offered to help me?" she asked. "Because you thought the law wouldn't protect me from Donovan?" Owen's blue eyes held her steadily. "I offered because you deserve to feel safe in your own home." "Badge or no badge, I'd have done the same." Hannah looked away, uncomfortable with the sincerity in his gaze. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "Good night, Marshal Garrett." "Good night, Mrs. Vaughan," he replied, the formality returning to his voice at her cue. As the second week of Owen's stay drew to a close, Hannah found herself wondering if he would extend his lodgings. She told herself her interest was purely financial. Losing a reliable boarder would affect her weekly income, but deep down, she knew there was more to it. Despite her best efforts, she'd come to look forward to his presence, to their conversations, to the sense of security she felt knowing he was nearby. The thought troubled her. Dependence on a man in any form was a weakness she couldn't afford. On Saturday morning, Hannah was alone in the house except for Louisa, who was shopping at the market. The other boarders were gone for the day, and Owen had left before dawn to meet with Sheriff Callahan. Hannah was sweeping the upstairs hallway when she heard the front door open. "Louisa," she called, pausing in her work. "Did you forget something?" Instead of Louisa's familiar reply, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Hannah's grip tightened on the broom handle as Donovan appeared at the top of the stairs, a malevolent smile spreading across his face. "Morning, Mrs. Vaughan," he drawled, blocking the stairway. "Thought we might continue our discussion about your husband's debts, privately." Hannah backed away, keeping the broom between them. "Get out of my house, Mr. Donovan. I've nothing to discuss with you." He advanced slowly, like a predator sure of its prey. "Oh, I think you do. See, I've been watching you these past couple weeks, getting mighty friendly with that new boarder of yours." His smile twisted into something ugly. "What would he think if he knew what kind of woman you really are?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Hannah said, though her heart pounded with fear. "Your husband told me all about you," Donovan continued, taking another step forward. "How you were no better than a whore before he married you. How you'd do anything for the right price." White-hot rage surged through Hannah. Of course Richard would have spread such lies to excuse his own infidelities. "My husband was a liar and a drunk," she spat. "And you're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll scream loud enough to bring the whole street running." Donovan laughed. "Scream all you want. This part of town's quiet on Saturday mornings. Everyone's at the market or church." His hand moved to his gun belt. "Now, we can settle this easy or we can make it difficult. Your choice." Hannah calculated her options. The window behind her was too small to climb through quickly. If she could get to Owen's room, there might be a weapon. She feinted left, then darted right toward Owen's door. Donovan was faster. His hand caught her arm, yanking her back with bruising force. Hannah swung the broom, catching him across the face. He cursed, slapping her hard enough to make her ears ring. She stumbled backward, losing her grip on the broom. "You'll pay for that," Donovan growled, reaching for her again. Hannah opened her mouth to scream, but before she could, the sound of a gun being cocked echoed in the hallway. "Touch her again, and it'll be the last thing you do." Owen stood at the top of the stairs, his revolver aimed steadily at Donovan's chest. His eyes, usually warm, had gone cold and hard as steel. Donovan froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Now, Marshal, this is just a private matter between the lady and me. Her husband owed me money." "Step away from Mrs. Vaughan," Owen ordered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Donovan complied, backing up slowly. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just—" "Save it for the judge," Owen interrupted. "You're under arrest for assault, trespassing, and threatening behavior." He glanced briefly at Hannah. "Are you hurt?" She touched her cheek, which stung from Donovan's slap. "I'm all right." "Good. Mrs. Vaughan, if you wouldn't mind taking his gun carefully. Grip it by the handle and set it on that table." Hannah approached Donovan cautiously, removing his pistol from its holster and placing it on the hall table as instructed. "Now the knife in his boot," Owen directed. "Left ankle." Donovan's eyes widened in surprise that Owen knew about the hidden weapon. Keeping her movements deliberate, Hannah retrieved the knife. "There's rope in my room," Owen said. "Top drawer of the dresser." Hannah hurried to fetch it, grateful for something to do that took her away from Donovan's hateful glare. When she returned, Owen had the man face down on the floor. "Tie his hands behind his back," Owen instructed. "Make the knots tight." Hannah's hands trembled slightly, but she managed to secure Donovan's wrists firmly. As soon as she finished, Owen holstered his own weapon and took over, checking her work before binding the man's ankles as well. "Hannah, would you go to the sheriff's office? Tell Callahan I've got Donovan and to bring a deputy." She nodded, relieved to have a reason to leave. As she reached the stairs, Owen added softly, "You did well. Very well." The pride in his voice warmed something deep inside her, but Hannah pushed the feeling aside as she hurried down the stairs. This wasn't the time for such thoughts. By evening, the events of the morning had spread throughout El Paso. Donovan was behind bars, and Sheriff Callahan had praised Hannah's courage in helping apprehend a dangerous criminal. Apparently, Donovan was wanted not just for the murders Owen had mentioned, but for several other crimes across the territory. Hannah sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The physical danger had passed, but the emotional aftermath left her unsettled. Donovan's words about Richard's lies, the moment of terror when she thought he might hurt her, or worse, it had brought back memories she'd worked hard to suppress. The screen door creaked open behind her. Hannah didn't need to turn to know it was Owen. "May I join you?" he asked quietly. Hannah nodded, and he settled into the chair beside hers. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors deepen across the horizon. "Sheriff Callahan thinks Donovan will hang," Owen said eventually. "They found evidence in his belongings linking him to the rustling operation, and to 3 murders." "Good," Hannah replied simply. Owen studied her profile in the fading light. "You're still troubled." It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. "He said things about Richard, about me." She swallowed hard. Lies, but the kind that people are all too willing to believe about a woman. "No one who knows you would believe them," Owen said firmly. Hannah gave a bitter laugh. "You don't know me, Owen, not really." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're brave and independent. I know you've built something here that matters. I know you face each day with determination despite whatever pain you carry from your past." His words, spoken with such certainty, threatened to breach the walls Hannah had built around her heart. She stood abruptly, needing to escape his perceptiveness. "Thank you for saving me today," she said formally. "I'm grateful." Owen rose as well, maintaining a respectful distance. "I didn't save you, Hannah. You were saving yourself. I just arrived in time to help." Something in his tone, the absence of masculine pride, the genuine respect made Hannah turn to face him fully. In the deepening twilight, his features were half in shadow, but his eyes still held that steadfast warmth that had begun to feel like a beacon in her uncertain world. "My 2 weeks are up tomorrow," Owen said after a moment. "I'd like to extend my stay if you'll have me. The investigation is ongoing." "Of course," Hannah replied, ignoring the relief that flooded through her. "Your room is available." Owen nodded, then hesitated. "There's a social at the church tomorrow evening. Dancing, food." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might consider attending, with me." Hannah stared at him, caught off guard by the invitation. "You're asking me to accompany you, like a calling." "If you'd like to think of it that way," Owen said carefully. "Or simply as two friends enjoying an evening out." Friends. The word should have reassured her, but Hannah found herself oddly disappointed, which made no sense at all. "I don't dance," she said, the excuse sounding weak even to her own ears. A smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth. "Neither do I. But I hear Mrs. Peterson makes an apple pie that's worth enduring a social for." The gentle humor in his voice coaxed a reluctant smile from Hannah. "Well, for apple pie, I suppose I could make an appearance." "I'll call for you at 7 then," Owen said, his smile broadening. "Good night, Hannah." As he went inside, Hannah remained on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. She told herself she'd agreed for practical reasons, maintaining good relations with a boarder, showing her face at a community event to help her business's reputation. But the flutter of anticipation in her stomach suggested otherwise. The next evening found Hannah standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, scrutinizing her appearance with a critical eye. She'd chosen her best dress, a deep blue cotton with only minimal black trim, the first garment she'd purchased after feeling she could respectably leave behind the full mourning attire she'd worn for 6 months after Richard's death. Louisa had insisted on arranging Hannah's hair, pinning the dark brown waves up in a style more elaborate than Hannah's usual practical bun. "You look beautiful, Nina," Louisa said, adjusting a final pin. "Like a young woman should look, not like someone's grandmother." Hannah frowned at her reflection. "It's not a romantic outing, Louisa, it's just a church social." "With a handsome Marshal," Louisa pointed out, her eyes twinkling, "who looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." "Don't be ridiculous," Hannah protested, though a warmth crept into her cheeks. "Owen Garrett is a good man who's been kind to me, nothing more." Louisa merely hummed skeptically as she put away the hairpins. When Hannah descended the stairs at 7, Owen was waiting in the front parlor, dressed in a clean white shirt with a dark vest and his usual denim trousers, freshly pressed. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and the effect was striking. Hannah faltered momentarily on the last step, struck by how handsome he looked. Owen's eyes widened slightly as he caught sight of her, and something in his expression made Hannah's pulse quicken. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," Hannah replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "You're quite presentable yourself." A smile touched his lips at her formal tone. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The church was only a 10-minute walk from the boarding house. As they strolled through the streets of El Paso, Hannah was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. A widow appearing at a social function with a man would certainly start tongues wagging. "Does it bother you?" Owen asked quietly, noticing her tension. What they might say, Hannah considered this. A year ago it would have. Now, I find I care less for the opinions of people who never lifted a finger to help me when Richard was alive. Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Small towns have long memories and sharp tongues, but they can also rally around their own when it matters. Are you speaking from experience? Hannah asked. In a way, Owen replied. After my parents died, our neighbors stepped in to help me keep the ranch going until I was old enough to make my own decisions about it. Some did it out of kindness, others out of obligation or appearances, but it made a difference. What happened to the ranch? I sold it eventually, Owen said. Kept enough land for breeding and training horses, but the cattle operation was too much for one man. His expression turned reflective. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to keep it all. Regrets? Hannah asked softly. Owen glanced down at her, his eyes warm. Some. But I've learned that looking backward too much makes it hard to see the path ahead. They reached the churchyard, where lanterns had been strung between trees, casting a golden glow over trestle tables laden with food. A fiddle player and banjo player provided lively music, and several couples were already dancing on a wooden platform erected for the occasion. Hannah recognized most of the faces. El Paso wasn't so large that a business owner wouldn't know the majority of its citizens. She nodded politely to acquaintances as Owen led her toward the refreshment table. Mrs. Vaughan, Marshal Garrett, Mrs. Peterson greeted them warmly. So glad you could join us. Help yourselves to punch and pie. I've heard your apple pie is the best in the county, Owen said, earning a pleased blush from the older woman. Oh, go on with you, she replied, clearly delighted. But do try a piece. I saved an extra large one for our distinguished visitor. As they found seats at one of the tables with their refreshments, Hannah was surprised by how easy it was to be in Owen's company. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences as they enjoyed their food and the atmosphere. Would you care to dance? Owen asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. Hannah hesitated. I told you I don't dance. Can't or won't? Owen asked perceptively. Both, Hannah admitted. Richard never approved of dancing, said it was immodest. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, a flash of anger quickly controlled. Your husband sounds like he denied you many simple pleasures. That he did, Hannah agreed quietly. Owen set down his punch cup. Well, I'm not much of a dancer myself, but it seems a shame to waste such fine music. He offered his hand. I promise not to step on your toes more than 3 times. Despite her reservations, Hannah found herself smiling at his teasing tone. I'll hold you to that, she said, placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against hers as he led her to the edge of the dance floor. When he placed his other hand lightly at her waist, Hannah tensed momentarily, unaccustomed to a man's touch that didn't bring pain or demand submission. All right? Owen asked softly, noticing her reaction. Hannah nodded, forcing herself to relax as they began to move to the music. True to his word, Owen was no expert dancer, but he moved with the same natural grace she'd observed in all his actions. After a few tentative steps, Hannah found herself following his lead more easily, almost enjoying the gentle sway and turn of the waltz. See? Not so terrible, Owen murmured, his blue eyes warm with approval. You still have one toe-stepping opportunity left, Hannah replied, surprising herself with the teasing response. Owen laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I'll save it for a dramatic moment. As they continued to dance, Hannah became aware of the whispers and glances from the townspeople around them. Mrs. Wilson, the doctor's wife, was speaking behind her hand to Mrs. Thompson, both watching with obvious interest. Sheriff Callahan, standing near the punch bowl, raised his cup in a small salute when he caught Hannah's eye. "Everyone's watching us," Hannah murmured. "Let them," Owen replied simply. "You've done nothing wrong by dancing at a church social." The music ended, and Owen led her back to their table. As Hannah sat down, she realized she was smiling, truly smiling, not the polite expression she typically wore for customers and acquaintances. It had been so long since she'd felt this lightness that the sensation was almost disorienting. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Owen introduced her to a cattle buyer he'd been working with as part of his investigation, and Hannah found herself drawn into conversations with townspeople who had previously kept their distance. Whether it was Owen's presence or the recent events with Donovan, something had shifted in how the town viewed her. As they walked home under a canopy of stars, Hannah felt a strange mix of contentment and trepidation. The evening had been enjoyable more than enjoyable. For the first time since Richard's death, she'd felt like a young woman rather than a widow burdened by the past. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," Owen said as they reached the boarding house porch. "I hope you enjoyed yourself." "I did," Hannah admitted, "more than I expected to." They stood facing each other in the soft glow of the porch lantern. Owen's eyes searched her face, and Hannah felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. "Hannah," he said softly, "I want you to know that the sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever he had been about to say." Both turned to see Sheriff Callahan riding toward them, accompanied by two deputies. "Marshal Garrett," Callahan called. "Got word of cattle movement near the Sanchez ranch. Our informant thinks tonight's the night." Owen's expression shifted instantly from tender to alert. "I'll get my gear," he said, then turned back to Hannah. "I'm sorry." "Duty calls," Hannah said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Be careful." Owen nodded, then hurried inside to collect his weapons and coat. Hannah remained on the porch, watching as he emerged minutes later, checked his gun, and mounted the horse one of the deputies had brought for him. "Don't wait up," Owen called to her. "This might take all night." As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Hannah hugged her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the mild evening. The abrupt shift from their shared moment to Owen's departure was a stark reminder of reality. Owen Garrett was a lawman, a man with responsibilities that would always take precedence. And she was a woman who had sworn never to make herself vulnerable to a man's priorities again. With a sigh, Hannah went inside, telling herself the hollow feeling in her chest was simply fatigue after an unusual evening. 3 days passed with no sign of Owen. Hannah tried to focus on her work, on the daily routines of running the boarding house, but worry gnawed at her constantly. Had something gone wrong during the raid? Was he hurt, or worse? Late on the third afternoon, as Hannah was preparing the dining room for supper, the front door opened. She looked up to see Owen standing in the entryway, his clothes dusty, dark stubble covering his jaw, fatigue evident in the lines of his face. But he was whole, uninjured as far as she could tell. Relief rushed through her with such force that Hannah had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. "You're back," she said, striving for a casual tone. "We got them," Owen replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Caught the whole gang red-handed with stolen cattle." Donovan was right in the middle of it, giving orders. "Turns out he was higher in the organization than we thought." "That's wonderful news," Hannah said sincerely. "You must be exhausted." Owen ran a hand over his face. 3 days in the saddle, minimal sleep. "I could use a bath and about 12 hours of rest." "I'll have Louisa prepare hot water for you," Hannah said, moving toward the kitchen. "And there's stew keeping warm if you're hungry." "Hannah," Owen called softly, stopping her. "I missed you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as she met his gaze. I was concerned when you didn't return," she admitted. A tired smile touched his lips. "Just concerned." Hannah's cheeks warmed. "Perhaps a bit more than concerned," she conceded. Owen took a step toward her, then swayed slightly. Hannah moved quickly to his side, offering her arm for support. "You need rest," she said firmly. "Everything else can wait." He didn't argue, allowing her to help him up the stairs to his room. At the door, he paused. "We need to talk, Hannah, about what's happening between us." Hannah nodded, though anxiety fluttered in her chest. "Tomorrow, when you're rested." Owen searched her face, then nodded. "Tomorrow, then." As she closed his door behind her, Hannah leaned against the wall, her thoughts in turmoil. What was happening between them? Friendship, certainly. Respect. Trust, perhaps, beginning to form. But the way her pulse quickened when he was near, the way she'd missed his presence these past days, that suggested something deeper, something she'd sworn never to risk again. The following morning, Hannah rose early, unable to sleep as her mind churned with thoughts of the coming conversation with Owen. She had just finished preparing the breakfast when she heard his tread on the stairs. Owen looked refreshed, clean-shaven, his blue eyes clear despite the lingering shadows beneath them. He greeted the other boarders cordially before taking his usual seat at the table. Throughout breakfast, Hannah was acutely aware of his gaze following her as she served food and refilled coffee cups. When the meal ended and the other boarders departed for their daily activities, Owen remained at the table, waiting. Hannah busied herself clearing dishes, postponing the inevitable. Finally, when she could delay no longer, she sat across from him, hands folded tightly in her lap. "You wanted to talk," she said, unable to meet his eyes. Owen was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "I've received orders from Marshal Davis," he said finally. "The rustling case has opened up a larger investigation into corruption that leads all the way to Santa Fe. They want me there as soon as possible." Hannah's heart sank. "You're leaving?" "Yes," Owen confirmed. "Tomorrow morning." "I see," Hannah said, striving to keep her voice neutral. "Well, I appreciate you giving notice. I'll have your final bill ready." "Hannah," Owen interrupted gently. "That's not what I wanted to discuss." She finally looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "These past weeks," Owen continued, "I've come to care for you deeply, more than I expected, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Hannah's breath caught. "Owen, please let me finish," he said softly. "I know you've been hurt. I know you have every reason to distrust men to protect yourself, and I would never ask you to risk your heart if you weren't ready." He reached across the table, his hand palm up in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Hannah placed her hand in his. "I'm not asking for promises," Owen said. "I'm simply asking if you might consider writing to me while I'm gone, getting to know each other better through letters. And perhaps, when this assignment is done, I could return to El Paso, to see if what's growing between us might have a chance to flourish." Hannah stared at their joined hands, emotions warring within her, fear of being hurt again, caution born of bitter experience. But alongside these familiar companions was something new, a tentative hope, fragile but persistent. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Not of you exactly, but of trusting again, of being wrong again." Owen's fingers tightened gently around hers. "Fear is natural after what you've experienced. I don't expect you to set it aside easily." "Richard started out kind too," Hannah said, the words painful but necessary. "He changed. Or perhaps he simply revealed his true nature over time." "I can't promise I'll never disappoint you," Owen replied honestly. "But I can promise I'll never intentionally hurt you. I can promise to respect your independence, your strength. I admire those qualities in you, Hannah. I wouldn't want to diminish them. His sincerity was evident in every word, every look. Hannah wanted to believe him more than she'd wanted anything in a long time. I think, she said slowly, I could write to you while you're gone. The smile that lit Owen's face warmed something deep inside her. That's all I'm asking for. A chance. A chance, Hannah agreed, her own lips curving into a tentative smile. But a slow one. I need time, Owen. Time you shall have, he promised. As much as you need. The next morning, Hannah stood on the porch as Owen secured his saddlebags to his horse. The early dawn light cast long shadows across the street, and a chill hung in the air despite the promise of a warm day to come. I've left the address where you can reach me, Owen said, checking the saddle cinch one last time. It might take a while for letters to find me, depending on how the investigation progresses. Hannah nodded, clutching a small package wrapped in brown paper. For your journey, she explained, holding it out to him. Some of Lewis's biscuits and dried apple slices. Owen accepted it with a smile, tucking it carefully into his saddlebag. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, I'll miss our evening talks. As will I, Hannah admitted, surprising herself with the candor. Owen stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. May I write first, or would you prefer to initiate our correspondence? You should write first, Hannah said, to let me know you've arrived safely. He nodded, then reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When she remained still, he gently took her hand, raising it to his lips for a brief, tender kiss against her knuckles. Until we meet again, Hannah Vaughan, he said softly. Hannah's heart fluttered at the gesture, so different from Richard's demanding, possessive touches. Travel safely, Owen Garrett. With a final smile, Owen mounted his horse, tipped his hat to her, and rode away. Hannah remained on the porch until he disappeared from view, her emotions a complex tangle of anticipation and trepidation. Whatever came next would not be simple. But for the first time since Richard's death, Hannah found herself looking toward the future with something other than grim determination. A flicker of hope had kindled in her heart, small, cautious, but undeniably present. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after Owen's departure, the envelope slightly creased from its journey. Hannah recognized his neat handwriting immediately and took the letter to the privacy of her room before opening it with trembling fingers. Dear Hannah, I've arrived safely in Santa Fe after an uneventful journey, save for one rainstorm that soaked me to the skin and reminded me how much I prefer a solid roof over my head to the open sky when the heavens decide to empty themselves. Your biscuits sustained me admirably. Please convey my compliments to Louisa. The investigation here is more complex than initially thought. Corruption has threaded its way through several territorial offices, and untangling the web will take time and discretion. I find myself missing the relative simplicity of tracking cattle rustlers, and even more, the quiet evenings on your porch. Santa Fe is a busy city compared to El Paso, full of government officials, wealthy merchants, and travelers from all corners. The plaza bustles with activity from dawn until well past dusk. Yet for all its liveliness, I find it lacks the warmth I came to associate with your boarding house. I hope this letter finds you well and your business thriving. Have the other boarders behaved themselves in my absence? Has Mrs. Peterson baked another of her famous apple pies? These small details of daily life in El Paso would bring me great pleasure to read about, should you find time to write. With warmest regards, Owen. Hannah read the letter twice, smiling at his descriptions and the careful way he avoided placing any pressure on her to respond. It was so characteristic of the man she had come to know, respectful of her boundaries while gently opening a door for further connection. That evening after supper, Hannah sat at her small desk and began her reply. The words came more easily than she expected, sharing news of the town, of her boarders, of the small improvements she was making to the boarding house. She found herself including personal thoughts as well, how she'd started reading again in the evenings, something Richard had discouraged, how she'd planted flowers along the front walkway, how Sheriff Callahan had begun recommending the sunflower to respectable travelers. She signed it simply Hannah, then sealed the envelope before she could reconsider the growing warmth of her tone. Weeks turned to months as their correspondence continued. Owen's letters arrived irregularly, sometimes two in quick succession, sometimes with gaps that left Hannah checking anxiously for the mail each day. Her own responses became increasingly open, revealing more of her thoughts, her past, her hopes for the future. In his fourth letter, Owen first mentioned the possibility of returning to El Paso when his assignment concluded. By his seventh, the suggestion had transformed into a more definite plan. "The work here is finally showing progress," he wrote. "Marshal Davis believes we may conclude the main investigation within another month. When that happens, I find myself drawn not to Colorado or my small horse ranch, but to a certain boarding house in El Paso, if its proprietress would welcome my return." Hannah held that letter close to her heart, both thrilled and terrified by the prospect of seeing Owen again. In the months of his absence, her feelings had deepened through their written exchanges. The fear remained a constant companion after her experience with Richard, but it had diminished, overshadowed by a growing affection she could no longer deny. In her reply, she wrote, "The sunflower has a room available whenever you wish to return." The proprietress finds she misses the quiet evenings of conversation on the porch, even as the autumn evenings grow cooler. It was as close to an invitation as she could bring herself to extend. When no response came for 3 weeks, Hannah began to worry. Had she been too forward? Had something happened to him? The investigation involved dangerous men, after all. Then, on a crisp October afternoon, as Hannah was supervising the delivery of a new stove for the kitchen, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the street. Even at a distance, she would know that straight-backed posture, that purposeful stride. Her heart leapt to her throat as Owen Garrett approached, looking much as he had when he left, perhaps a bit leaner, his face more tanned from months of outdoor work. Hannah stepped away from the deliveryman, moving to the edge of the porch. Owen stopped at the bottom step, hat in hand, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. "You didn't write that you were coming," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to surprise you," Owen replied. "I hope that's all right." Hannah nodded, unable to find words for the emotion surging through her. Joy, anxiety, longing all tangled together in a knot that tightened her chest. "Is that room still available?" Owen asked, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. "Yes," Hannah managed. "Of course." He climbed the steps slowly, stopping when they stood face to face. "Hannah," he said softly, "these past months have been the longest of my life, despite being some of the busiest. Every letter from you made the days brighter." "I missed you too," Hannah admitted, the words feeling monumental as they left her lips. Owen's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "May I stay a while, not just as a boarder, but as someone who hopes to court you properly if you're willing?" Hannah's breath caught. Despite months of correspondence, despite the growing feelings between them, having Owen here in person made everything suddenly, vividly real. The prospect of opening her heart fully, of trusting completely, still terrified her. "I'm still afraid," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I know," Owen said gently. "And I'll wait, Hannah, however long it takes for you to feel safe. I'm not going anywhere. The promise in his words, the steadfastness in his eyes, touched something deep within her. Hannah took a tremulous breath, then reached out her hand to him, a small gesture but significant in its voluntary nature. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'd like to try." Owen's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong but gentle. "That's all I ask." As the weeks passed, Owen settled back into life at the Sunflower, but with a new role that evolved gradually. He still paid for his room, insisting on maintaining Hannah's financial independence, but he also began helping more around the boarding house, fixing the loose floorboards Hannah had been meaning to address, repainting the exterior before winter set in, chopping firewood for the coming cold months. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully. Evening conversations on the porch became walks through town on Sunday afternoons. Owen began escorting Hannah to church, sitting beside her in the pew to the approving nods of some townspeople and the disapproving glances of others who thought a widow should observe a longer period of mourning, regardless of the circumstances. Hannah found she cared less and less for the opinions of others as her confidence in Owen's character grew. He was patient with her moments of withdrawal, understanding when memories of Richard made her flinch from a too sudden movement or an unexpected touch. He shared his own vulnerabilities, his regrets about selling the family ranch, his doubts about his future as a marshal when the work took him away from the places and people that mattered. "I've been thinking of returning to full-time horse trading," he confided one evening as they sat before the fire in the boarding house parlor. The other boarders had retired, leaving them alone with the crackling flames and their thoughts, "because of the danger in your martial work?" Hannah asked. Owen shook his head. "No, though that's a consideration. More because I've found someone that matters more to me than the badge." His meaning was clear, and Hannah felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You've built a respected career," she said softly. "I wouldn't want you to give that up because of me." "Not because of you," Owen corrected. "For you, for us, if there's to be an us, there's a difference." Hannah considered this. "Richard always blamed me for his failures," she said, the admission still painful despite the months of healing. "Said I held him back from greater success, that supporting a wife prevented him from taking the risks that would have made his fortune." Anger flashed briefly in Owen's eyes. "Your husband was a fool who couldn't recognize the treasure he had." He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Hannah, you've never held me back. Your strength, your determination, they inspire me to be better, to build something lasting." The sincerity in his words brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "I believe you," she whispered, realizing with some surprise that it was true. Somewhere in the months of letters and weeks of courtship, trust had taken root in the barren ground of her heart, growing slowly but steadily. Owen reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I love you, Hannah Vaughan. I think I have since that first week, watching you stand up to Donovan, seeing your courage in the face of fear." Hannah's breath caught. No one had said those words to her in years, not since the early days of her marriage, before Richard's true nature emerged. "You don't have to say it back," Owen added quickly, noting her silence. "I just wanted you to know." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, then back up to meet his eyes. "I think I might love you too," she said softly. "I'm still learning what that means, real love, not what I had before. But whatever this feeling is, it's stronger and truer than anything I've known." The joy that transformed Owen's face made Hannah's heart swell. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned toward her. "May I kiss you, Hannah?" The question itself, the respect it demonstrated, the choice it offered, cemented her decision. "Yes," she whispered. Owen's lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought fresh tears to her eyes. No demand, No possession, only tenderness and a promise of more to come if she wanted it. When he drew back, Hannah found herself leaning toward him, prolonging the contact. "All right?" Owen asked, his voice husky. Hannah nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "More than all right." As winter settled over El Paso, bringing crisp days and cold nights, Hannah and Owen's relationship deepened. The boarding house thrived, attracting a steady clientele of respectable travelers who appreciated its clean rooms and home-cooked meals. Owen continued to help with improvements, his presence becoming so natural that Hannah could barely remember how she had managed without him. At Christmas, Owen surprised Hannah with a small velvet box containing a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a sunflower. "It reminded me of your boarding house," he explained, "and of you, strong, bright, turning always toward the light despite shadows." Hannah's gift to him was a leather-bound journal. "For when you travel," she said, "so you can write down your thoughts until you can share them with me." The meaningful glance they exchanged acknowledged the reality they had begun discussing more frequently, that Owen's work might occasionally take him away. But that, unlike Richard's absences, his would be purposeful, necessary, and temporary, always with a return to her as his priority. As the new year of 1879 began, Hannah found herself contemplating a future she had never dared imagine after Richard's death. A future with a partner who valued her independence yet offered support, who admired her strength yet provided protection when needed, who saw her not as a possession but as an equal. One clear February evening, as they walked back to the boarding house after supper at the town's new restaurant, Owen guided Hannah to a small bench in the town square. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you," he said, his expression serious but warm. Hannah's heart quickened. "Yes?" Owen took both her hands in his. "I've received an offer from the Army to return to Colorado as their head horse trainer and supplier. It would mean a permanent position, good pay, and no more dangerous marshal work." "Colorado," Hannah repeated, a pang of disappointment cutting through her joy. "That's quite far from El Paso." "It is," Owen agreed. "Which is why I haven't accepted yet, because the position would require a decision about our future." Hannah held her breath, sensing what was coming next. Owen reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, similar to the one that had contained her Christmas brooch but smaller still. "Hannah Vaughan, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what it means to be patient, to earn trust rather than demand it, to love someone for exactly who they are." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond that caught the lamplight and scattered it in brilliant sparks. "I'm asking if you would do me the honor of becoming my wife, of coming with me to Colorado to build a new life together, or staying here in El Paso if that's your preference. The where matters far less to me than the who." Hannah stared at the ring, emotions flooding through her: joy, love, and yes, still a whisper of fear. "The boarding house," she began. "Everything I've built here would be yours to keep, to sell, or to entrust to Lewis's management while we establish ourselves elsewhere," Owen said. "I would never ask you to simply abandon what you've worked so hard to create." The consideration in his words, the respect for what the sunflower represented to her, eased Hannah's anxiety. This was not Richard, demanding she subordinate her needs to his. This was Owen, offering partnership, choices, a shared future. "If we went to Colorado," Hannah said slowly, "would there be opportunities for me there, to contribute, to build something of my own alongside your work?" Owen smiled. The fort commander's wife mentioned in her letter that the officers' families are in desperate need of proper accommodations for visiting relatives. She suggested there might be interest in a small, well-run boarding house or inn nearby. Hannah's eyes widened at the thoughtfulness of his inquiries made even before he'd proposed, ensuring she would have options, independence. "And if I wanted to stay in El Paso?" she asked, needing to be certain of his flexibility. "Then I would open my horse trading business here," Owen replied without hesitation. "The Army's offer is appealing, but not as essential to my happiness as you are." The last of Hannah's reservations melted away. This was what love should be: mutual support, shared dreams, respect for each other's needs. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Owen Garrett, I will marry you." The joy that lit his face was worth every moment of fear she'd overcome, every cautious step she'd taken toward trusting again. Owen slid the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of respect, partnership, and love. They were married in April, when spring had turned the desert around El Paso into a briefly blooming paradise. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the friends Hannah had made during her time at the Sunflower Leusa, Sheriff Callahan and his wife, the other boarders who had become almost family, and even Mrs. Peterson, who supplied her famous apple pie for the wedding supper. After much discussion, they had decided to accept the Colorado position, with the provision that they would return to El Paso periodically to check on the Sunflower, which Leusa would manage in their absence. The boarding house would remain Hannah's property, her independent achievement and security. As they prepared to depart for their new home, Hannah stood on the porch of the Sunflower one last time, looking out at the town that had seen her deepest sorrows and most unexpected joys. "Having second thoughts?" Owen asked gently, coming to stand beside her. Hannah shook her head. "No, just remembering how far I've come." She turned to him with a smile. From a frightened widow hiding behind water troughs to a woman ready to start a new adventure. Owen's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close. "You were never just a frightened widow, Hannah. You were always brave, even when you were afraid." "Because of you," Hannah said softly. "No," Owen corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You had that courage all along. I just had the patience to wait until you discovered it for yourself." Hannah leaned into his embrace, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From her terror of trusting another man after Richard's betrayals, to this moment of profound faith in the future they would build together. As they climbed into the wagon that would carry them north to Colorado and their new life, Hannah cast one last glance at the Sunflower boarding house with its freshly painted sign and blooming garden. She had come to El Paso broken and afraid, determined only to survive. She was leaving whole, loved, and facing the future with hope rather than dread. "Ready?" Owen asked, taking the reins. Hannah slipped her hand into his, the gold of her wedding band catching the morning light. "Ready," she replied, and meant it with all her heart. The years that followed proved the wisdom of Hannah's hard-won trust. Their life in Colorado flourished beyond her expectations. Owen's work with the Army provided stability and respect in the community, while Hannah established a small but elegant boarding house that quickly became the preferred lodging for officers' families and distinguished visitors to the fort. They welcomed their first child, a son named James, a year after their arrival in Colorado. 2 years later, a daughter, Elizabeth, joined their family. Both children grew up surrounded by horses, open skies, and the unwavering love of parents who had found in each other what they had scarcely dared to hope for: a partnership of equals, a love built on patience and trust. When James was 7 and Elizabeth 5, they made their first journey back to El Paso. The town had grown, but the Sunflower still stood, prospering under Lewis's capable management. as Hannah introduced her children to the place where their parents' story had begun. She reflected on how completely her life had transformed from those dark days after Richard's death. "Mama," Elizabeth asked as they stood on the porch where Hannah and Owen had shared so many evening conversations, "is this where you fell in love with Papa?" Hannah exchanged a smile with Owen. "It is," she replied, "though it took me quite some time to realize it." "Papa says the best things are worth waiting for," James piped up importantly. Owen laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "That they are, son, that they are." Later that night, after the children were asleep in the room that had once been Owen's, Hannah and Owen sat together on the porch, just as they had years before. "Any regrets?" Owen asked, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. Hannah considered the question seriously. "Only that I was so afraid for so long," she said finally. "We might have had more time together if I'd been braver sooner." Owen shook his head. "You needed that time, and I needed to earn your trust." He pressed a kiss to her hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver that matched his own. "Besides, we have the rest of our lives ahead of us." "We do," Hannah agreed, leaning into his embrace. As the stars appeared above El Paso, Hannah thought of the frightened woman she had been, hiding behind a water trough from dangers both real and remembered. That woman could never have imagined the life she now led, the love she had found, the family she had created, the strength she had discovered within herself. The path had not been easy. The scars of her past had not disappeared entirely. There were still moments when old fears surfaced, when trust required conscious choice rather than instinct. But Owen had been patient through every step, never pushing, always supporting. And in that patience, Hannah had found the freedom to love again, not despite her past, but with all the wisdom and appreciation that her difficult journey had granted her. What had begun with a gunshot and a chance meeting had grown into a life richer and more fulfilling than she had ever dared to dream. "I love you," she said simply, the words coming easily now after years of practice. Owen's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Hannah Garrett. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Together they watched the moon rise over the desert, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. He, a woman worth waiting for; she, a man worthy of her hard-won trust.